Hello friends, I'm Nukebrush and today we are going to make Imperial Self-Propelled Artillery, the Basilisk.
Time to go nuclear.
This model came to me already printed. So, video number 13. I'm not particularly superstitious, and what could possibly go wrong? Luck simply has to be on my side when assembling and painting this model, right? Well, in general, believe it or not, but the assembly of this tank lasted for 6 months. This basilisk fell on floor, cracked and glued together, waited for replacement of incomplete parts, and suffered for a simple change of ideas and priorities in assembly and painting. And here finally is a finished video about the hard fate of the lucky sand dragon of number 13. I started this project 6 months ago, when I was assembling the model of the Scorpicore rocket platform. Nothing special, but as it turned out, the gun parts, namely gun platform, guidance systems and the barrel itself, are suitable for the Basilisk self-propelled gun. So instead of making one combined rocket artillery model in the same camo, I decided to make two different ones. Accordingly, I had to put the parts of the gun already painted in sand color aside until the chassis arrived. There is nothing complicated in the tank assembly itself, everything fits together well, just like when assembling the Chimera's chassis. There are few removable parts, but for ease of painting I decided to install magnets on all possible places of the tank, so the Basilisk had to suffer even more than my other models. Finally, the assembly is finished, let's start priming. As always, I prime the tank with a neutral primer Mr. Superso 1000, which will help hide printing errors and the crooked hands of the artist, who just managed to drop the gun platform on the floor and split it into pieces. So, in addition to the usual printing imperfections, there were also added unnatural cracks obtained in a completely natural way. I sealed the defects with liquid putty Mr. Surfacer 500, sanded them and primed again. As a kind of compensation for the Basilisk, I decided to add several non-original elements to the design, as well as a separate artillery fire correction system, which it seems to me somewhat revitalized the model. Nothing special, I just rummaged through the deposits of bits from various equipment and spare parts from other models. Of course, number 13 would not be 13 if the video about the assembly of these elements had survived. I'm not superstitious. I am not superstitious, but let's move to the next part of work. I applied shadows to the model using brown primer paint. Traditionally, I paint the bottom of the hull, tracks and the lower sides of all protruding parts of the model, as well as removable elements, turret, gun shield and gun itself, and of course the box of artillery system. Nothing complicated, the main thing is not to miss anything, so that you don't have to return to this process later. For the base color of the gun barrel and the platform, I used a sand paint primer. Remember, I painted it separately from the chassis. For the rest of the chassis, I used Decal paint, which will create a good base for our tank. The camouflage I chose will be desert, soft, two-tone, sand and brown. So first I use sand color to create a nice calm base, on top of which I will apply darker brown tones. Once the base color is applied, it is easy to highlight the shadows of protruding elements and recesses with a darker shade of Decal. After that, I applied a unifying thin layer of sand color, lighter than the base one. The Basilisk is ready for creating highlights. To do this, I go over the uppermost and protruding parts of the tank with lighter shades of Decal. When we are satisfied with the result and the paint has dried, we begin to mask the model for the application of the second color of desert camo. I use red-brown paint to create a wavy pattern on our tank. I apply the paint in a thin layer, and after it dries, I also begin to create highlights. After removing the masks, I did not quite like the sharp transition from brown to sand, so I went over the edges of the camouflage with different shades of those colors, as if blurring them. And I will gladly show this in video if the camera recorded all of this. Again, how can I not mention the video number? We will paint the tank tracks a little differently than we usually do. First we apply black metallic paint. This is the base on which we would normally apply a lot of rust spots, but we have a desert model, so there will be less rust. Don't worry, it will appear somewhat around the weathering stage. In the meantime, we will apply several shades of metallic on our tracks using the dry brush method. As usual, nothing complicated, especially if you mask the rest of the tank. When the metal elements of the tracks are shining bright, it is time to work on the rubber pads. I used rubber and tires paint, on top of which I randomly apply the imitation of wear and rubber chips using light grey paint. When the paint has dried, I take black wash and darken the tracks, paying special attention to the rubber elements. Tongue hull and tracks are almost ready, so we can start painting the small and not so small details of the Basilisk. I painted the grills, springs, gun parts and other metal elements of the hull using gunmetal paint. I applied the paint in several thin layers and at different angles to create a base layer which is good for working with thinner details. Well-prepared masks simplify working with an airbrush greatly and eliminate the need to touch up or repaint all mistakes. Again, like the tracks, I highlighted the metal parts using dry brush technology. Nothing tricky, the main thing is not to remove the masks so as not to glue them back. For all the metal parts of the tank, I used gunmetal paint, and the elements will get the final shine at the weathering stage. Once the metal is finished, we can move on to the other elements, for example, rubber handles or rubberized tubes of smoke launching. It is simple if you are just accurate. As you can see, our tank already has its first marking. And yes, number 13 is well deserved for our lucky Basilisk. To apply the markings, I used a metal stencil from which I cut out the necessary numbers. Using masking tape, I glue the numbers together and install the stencil in the required place. Adding a little more masking tape around to protect model from paint or spray, I can now apply the number with white paint. Small numbers and unit name are applied to the tank with a regular brush, and this is, so to speak, my freehand on this model. There are enough optical elements on our Basilisk. These are triplexes, headlights, as well as monitors for the gun guidance systems on the tank itself and on the artillery fire correction system. Let's start with that. I created the necessary base for our monitors with dark green paint. Of course, we will not stop at the base, we will create an imitation of information on our displays. For this we will apply decals in the main gun monitor and draw the radar grid by hand. For the triplexes of the command and gun turret we will use light green paint to create the base of our optics. After, as I assume, a successful experiment with the use of holographic film on the Chimera, I will use the same film, though in a different color, on our Basilisk. I chose a film with a green tint to maintain the unified color scheme of our optical devices. As in previous video, I glued the holographic film to a transparent plastic base using acrylic glue, and then secure the cutout triplex rectangle to the pre-painted base using the same glue. Since the holographic film is translucent, I painted the triplex base with a graduated paint transition, so-called lens effect. It turned out pretty good, I think. Meanwhile, our monitors have already acquired the decals and freehand writings, so before applying the final layer of varnish, I cover them with a thin layer of green shader to darken the corners and unify the screens a little. When it is done, we can move on. To apply decals to the Basilisk, and there are quite a few of them, as usual I cover the entire model with glossy varnish. This way the decals will stick better to the surface of our tank. I used microset and microsol modeling chemistry to install and weld decals all over the tank hull, on removable elements, and even on the imitation of our basilisk shells. When the decals have dried and began to show their shine, I applied matting chemistry to hide the brightness we don't need. If you are happy with the result, then we have to protect our work and apply a layer of varnish, now matte one. Now we will use enamel washes. I used Africa corpse wash modeling chemistry for the entire body and parts of our basilisk. Enamel washes have excellent fluidity, so they easily flow along various straight lines and protrusions, gather into recesses, and when dry create a pronounced volume and shadow. So in order to control the process and create mistakes, we can use a brush soaked in enamel thinner. After the washes have dried, we can cover our basilisk with matte varnish. Now let's start making wear and tear. I took a sponge, tear off a small piece, and using tweezers and light paint, randomly applied chips to those areas of our tank that may suffer due to natural wear or damage. Usually these are chassis elements, hatch flaps, armor plates, as well as corners and other protruding parts. Since our basilisk is an artillery system, the gun itself also suffers from wear, as well as adjacent parts such as the gun platform. After the sponge and randomly applied chips, I took a brush and tried to unify random chips into something more ordered, and also paint some scratches. When the light chips are done, we can take a dark brown paint and start imitating the effects of dark rust formed as a result of a deeper chip down to the bare metal, with the subsequent rusting. As usual, the main thing in applying chips is stopping time to emphasize the size and volume of the tank, and not to overload its appearance. When we are finished with the common chipping process, we can move on to something special, making a piece of desert, for example. As you may remember, the bonus for our basilisk is a freestanding laterally fire correction system, and it needs a separate base that imitates a sandy desert with minimal vegetation. I glued a paper backing on the oval base and mark out how the main box of the system will be placed on it, as well as smaller decorative elements. Then I applied the ready-made crackle mixture scored sand to the prepared base. What is interesting about it? When drying, this mixture naturally cracks and forms a natural-looking pattern of cracked soil. The more mixture you apply, the more and larger the cracks will be. I did not need two large cracks, so I applied the mixture in a thin layer. Next, when everything has dried, I use a spatula and the textured mix sand ground to create a desert surface for our mini diorama. To level the surface, I used a spatula soaked in water. Next, when our flat desert has dried out, we again place the main box of the artillery system on it, covered with masking tape. I want to create an imitation of the fact that the box has been installed for quite some time and is slightly covered with sand and small stones. Even some plants manage to grow in the shadow. I again applied the sand ground texture mix around the box, but this time using a brush. I also smoothed the paste with a brush soaked in water for a nice transition from the soil to the box. While the paste is not dry, I installed decorative garden stones of different sizes and shapes in it. I also sprinkled some gravel around the perimeter of the box to imitate smaller stones. When the texture mix has dried out, we can take out the box. Remember, we applied masking tape around its perimeter, and proceed with further painting of the base. First, I strengthened all the materials with diluted acrylic glue. Then I successfully applied dark brown, dark yellow, and light yellow paints to all large stones. Now we can begin to unify the diorama. Using the dry brush method and various sand shades, from dark to light of course, I gradually bring out the final texture and appearance of our sandy ground. When the result meets our expectations, we can put the prepared base aside until the next stage, weathering. The last stage of painting our lucky basilisk is applying various technical streaks, rust, and of course sand. I took technical liquid North Africa dust and applied it over the entire model with a brush. The liquid is quite saturated, so it would be not a bad idea to use a thinner to adjust the fluidity and location of the dustiest areas. Even in the arid climate, rust can form on metal parts. In our case, it is a burnt-out exhaust pipe of an artillery system. First of all, I applied dark oily spots using dark wash. Then I added dark and light rust dots with streaking rust effects and light rust wash chemicals to this worn-out pipe. There is not much left to add to our tank, only fuel and oil drops, so we take a brush again and create such streaks around the exhaust system, running gear and other technical hedges. At the final stage of weathering, I use dry sand color pigments, which will perfectly emphasize the effect of the general dustiness of the model. The last layer vanish, and our Basilisk is ready to take up an artillery position. Well, we've finished with number 13. Whether it was a lucky success or not, is for you, my viewers, to judge. If you liked the video and want to see more models like this, feel free to comment, like and share it. Also subscribe to the channel. Good luck with your models and see you soon!